Right. Good afternoon and welcome to Virginia IPL's Environmental Justice Now. Our conversation today is on the topic of zero fares, and we have a panel of advocates for public transportation in this region. I'm Faith Harris, co-director for Virginia Interfaith Power and Light, and we empower all faith communities across the Commonwealth of Virginia to achieve sustainable living. We are just beginning our work on equity in public transportation, and we are delighted to be able to host this dialogue today with these wonderful guests. Let me introduce the panel to you. Wyatt Gordon is Virginia Conservation Network's Policy and Campaign Manager for Land Use and Transportation, and also covers housing and transportation for the Virginia Mercury. Nelson Reveley is the Director of Operations for RVA Rapid Transit, a nonprofit dedicated to education and advocacy for frequent, far-reaching transit in Metro Richmond. Nelson is also a pastor in the Presbyterian Church USA and involved with a local nonprofit who, on a variety of issues, including housing, food access, and equitable community engagement. Faith Walker is RVA Rapid Transit's new Director of Community Engagement. She has a background in workforce development and community engagement with young adults in Church Hill. And then we also have with us today Julie Timm, CEO, Greater Richmond Transit Community, and she is, I guess we can call her the guru of rapid transit for not only for the Greater Richmond Transit Company, but for all of us who are interested in working in bettering and creating a better quality of life as it relates to public transportation. So we're just really delighted to have these guests with us today. So I'm going to jump right in and start with Julie because she is our guru and ask you this question, Julie. What is zero fare? Tell us about the concept and how might zero fare help us to have more equity in our region?
Well, thank you. And before I answer the question, I just want to say that as a transportation professional, most of you might be able to see that I'm actually sitting in a car while I'm on this. I have pulled over. I am safe. I am parked and in neutral. And my dad's dog, Lucy, is also joining us behind me. So welcome to Lucy as well. I pulled over to join this because zero fares and the concept of zero fare is so relevant to Richmond, to RVA, and to transit riders across the country. Zero fare is a concept that says when you ride at transit, the transit itself is a social service that is paid for by the local community, through revenues from taxes, advertising, businesses, nonprofits, universities, institutions, agencies, others that directly provide for the service itself. The payment for that service does not come from fares as people ride it. That's a little bit of a shift from the normal model where most people can think about transit. When you get on transit, you pay a fare, whether it's $1 or $2. And that's the standard model. Across the country, people have tried to go zero fares before, and some of the most successful stories actually ended up as failures because they were too successful. They resulted in ridership that was 40, 50, in some cases 100 or 200% increase in ridership amongst our most disadvantaged communities, amongst our most low-income communities. And the systems weren't able to sustain it. So they had to fall back and go back and put fares in place so that the supply and demand matched up. When we look here in our area and when we look at what's happened under COVID, and we consider that we went zero fares for the health of our operators and the health of our community, the data showed us that the majority of our riders here in the Richmond area are very low income, with household incomes below $10,000 or below $25,000. We have over nearly 80% of our riders have household incomes less than $50,000. And since the majority of our fares are collected from those communities in the poorest neighborhoods, it becomes a regressive tax on their ability to join into the prosperity of our region when their mobility has a barrier that they can only afford to ride transit once or twice a day to get to and from work, and they can't have that mobility most of us enjoy with our cars, as I'm sitting in one, to be able to get to shopping or healthcare or jobs or the park or friends. They can take that one trip a day. Zero fares means that it can open up the whole region to them and the prosperity that we enjoy to our low-income populations.
Thank you, Julie, for that opening statement and grounding for our conversation. So is there anyone else who would like to weigh in here on the concept of zero fares and how might zero fares help us to have more equity in our region?
Yeah, I would love to piggyback on and echo everything, Julie, that you're saying, and just say how important I think it is to be able to continue this pilot once the pandemic's over as well, to be able to try out how it works in, quote unquote, normal times, to see what kind of adjustments might be needed with zero fare, as we move into the summer and into the coming year. And yeah, just stress how important it is, particularly for the everyday regular riders with GRTC, to be able to get around everyday life more easily. And like you were saying, Julie, too, the degree to which zero fare opens up the ability to take more trips, to be able to get around and not have to ration your mobility based on only getting the one or two trips and back. It's just such a crucial opportunity right now that's growing out of what happened during the pandemic, that being able to extend it would be incredibly beneficial, and being able to again test out things and see how they work and test out the long-term political and fiscal and transit realities with it.
Yeah, and I'd also love to dig a little bit deeper since we touched on equity and who this is really going to benefit. I think it's really critical that we root this in who the ridership is today and what that would mean for their daily lives. So GRTC actually released their 2020 annual report recently, and 27% of riders have a combined household income. So household income, not just individual persons, but the cumulative of all working adults in that household. They have a combined household income of less than $10,000 per year. Over half earn less than the federal poverty rate of Virginia, which is $26,000 for a family of four. And a full 89% of GRTC's riders have household incomes below our state median. And when you layer on the statistic that 74% of the system's riders are people of color, then I think the equity argument behind making transit permanently fare free really compounds in the effectiveness of that. When you think we've had the past year to kind of reflect on what does it mean to support essential workers? What does it mean to reckon with equity and how we build a more prosperous country for all moving forward? And when you're looking at reducing transportation costs for some of the most cash-strapped households in our region, which thanks to the wonderful work of Faith and Nelson at RVA Rapid Transit, we know that most GRTC riders never have enough money on hand to access the $60 monthly passes. So they end up paying $1.50 for each fare that they ride. And that really adds up to about $1,000 per person per year in household costs. So when you're thinking about that 27% of GRTC riders where their whole household income is below $10,000, that extra $1,000 is a huge win, and it goes straight back into their pockets for them to invest in better housing, to invest in their children's educations, to invest in food, to invest in extra career training for themselves to kind of move forward. So we have to really think it's not just about the money, it's about investing in our ridership, which are our neighbors.
So what I'm hearing from the three of you thus far is that this is about the common good. For some people, that's an antiquated framing of of how we have developed our society, which is sad, right? Because in fact, many of the services that we enjoy now, public water systems, those kinds of things were all thought of and established from the place of providing services and for the common good, for the quality of life of all, so that all could benefit. And so thank you for grounding the conversation in the concerns and of equity, and also for giving us that those additional details related to the data and household incomes. And this question's not in our on our our script, but I do want to ask I want to also kind of counterbalance that with the idea of how do we also encourage ridership generally, right? Will zero fare have an impact with encouraging people to leave their cars in their driveways more often and use public transportation to at least attend and get to things around the city? What are your thoughts there? Anyone?
If I could jump into that one, the answer is yes and no. Going zero fare alone doesn't necessarily encourage ridership. It is one of many solutions that does increase people's ability to access transit, and also make them more willing. We hear from people who normally wouldn't ride transit when they hear zero fare, they're like, I'll give it a try. And so we will see some more ridership for that. We'll hear people who normally would use transit maybe once or twice a day, they might use it 3 or 4 for those other opportunities. But in order to make transit really a competitive and equitable mobility solution, there's so much more to it than zero fare. Zero fare is a critical part of that for our riders, not for all riders. There's some folks who have the means to ride and their businesses pay for it. But we also have to look at the reliability of our service, and that's on GRTC to step up. We have to look at the frequency and the coverage to make sure that when people do ride it, that they can get to where they need in a reasonable amount of time. And when you have a good system and a good network, which GRTC is rapidly growing towards, that in combination increases and encourages ridership. And then there's some other combination, other factors. So it's a complex plethora of different. There's no silver bullet. I love this concept. It's like silver buckshot that will increase ridership and increase people to get on board. And zero fares is one part of that.
Yeah, I would agree with Julie because, I mean, it's nice when something is free, but if that thing isn't useful, it doesn't matter what it cost or not, you're still not going to use it. So I think what we need to really think about is zero fare is a useful way that we might be able to kind of break some of the unhealthy politics around funding public transportation. Even here in the city of Richmond, the county of Henrico just last year cut their local funding to GRTC by half. So they cut $10 million out of GRTC's budget, which is a total of only $60 million. So we have to think about zero fare is really a yes and conversation. Yes, we want to be able to make sure that we have the most equitable transit system, and we need that transit system to go places that people want to go and to go there in a fast and reliable way. So it's not that we can just put money into zero fare and then say, okay, we're done. We really need to be investing in our transit system in a much more sustained and meaningful way. When we're talking about the 2040 vision plan for a functioning, healthy transit system for Richmond, moving away from back in 2014 when we used to be one of the worst public transit systems in the entire country, and moving towards something that functions for folks, we're looking at $160 million is what we need to provide the service that our region can grow with. We're right now at 60 million of that. So we have a lot of work to do to bring more people into our system as riders so that they talk to their local politicians and say, hey, this is good for me, this is good for my community, and it's time for us to fund it at a level that is beyond where we're currently at, where we're one of the 2 worst funded transit systems in the entire country per capita. The other one is in Hampton Roads. So we as a state are not really doing a good job of funding public transportation in order to get the growth outcomes, the equity outcomes, and really overcome some of the boundaries that people have faced for the last half century and longer.
So
the good news beyond that, if I could, can I follow up on that really quickly? Because I believe everything Wyatt says is great, but as a CEO of GRTC, I have to push back a little bit that since 2018, since the pulse, since the leadership with the redesign, GRTC is an amazing organization, and we've seen double-digit increases in ridership at times when the rest of the country was seeing a decrease in ridership. So there's a lot of great movement here. If we were to get that $160 million for this regional network, we couldn't even put that on the street tomorrow. The amount of operators we would have to drive. So it is a goal, it's a vision. We need to be working towards how do we connect up and how do we connect up equitably through the region, not just bus, but mobility services, paratransit services, senior rides, the whole range of interconnectedness. But Wyatt, I think we're pretty awesome here, but I appreciate what you're saying.
So I'm sorry.
As someone who relies on the bus to get around, I also think GRTC is awesome. But I always want us to keep an eye on how much more we can do.
Yeah, I think there's always that important distinction between the amount of funding that is geared towards public transit and then the operation of public transit. Those are two conversations that often get merged, but they're totally different things. Really well public transportation system underfunded. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I want to move to our second question. This is so rich. I don't know. Time seems to be going faster today than any other days. Faith, I think you had an example of why and who benefits and why the idea of zero fares is so critically important. And then if you would like to weigh in on that question a little bit as well. And I will also add to your question, are there other, what are the economics? Let's start talking about the economics a little bit more, digging in a little bit more. How do we pay for this if it's something that we could possibly achieve?
Sure. What I'd like to do is just start on who does it benefit. I've had the pleasure of actually talking and interacting with folks who zero fare benefit. And I love to share some of that feedback with you right now. We've initiated something called the Writer's Voice, where we're collecting feedback, stories, concerns folks have. So not only are we sharing with you guys those facts and statistics around zero fare, we can actually show you or let you hear people who are experiencing this and benefiting from it. And so what I do have an online survey that we're sharing, and I'll read just a few from you. Let's see. One person said, it has helped me ride to and from work better because I don't need to spend money to get to work during this pandemic. Also, as COVID-19 has been a health issue, I feel more comfortable and confident in taking the bus now with no contact and distance from other passengers. I believe that by no fare, I'm able to catch the bus faster. And so zero fare was, of course, established because we wanted to protect the public as well as the drivers. And so this continues to keep people safe. Also, what I like to do is just play a clip from a senior who's experiencing that. And this is from our audio way where people can share feedback from our hotline. And I'll play that now.
Yes, my name is John Luck, and I frequently catch the Chamberlain Avenue bus and Jenna Park bus. I think the service is real good since the pandemic persisted because it's no charge. Because most of the time I ride the bus, a lot of elderly people and handicapped people get on the bus and they show real good service. And we all on fixed income. Come on.
All right, and that's from John. So I would encourage anyone, feedback is very important. These clips are played in spaces such as these. Also, we're in a position to play them at different board meetings with public comment. So if you or anyone you know would like to give feedback on how zero fare has affected them and benefited them, you can call the number 804-286-0007. and share that. And for the economics part, I will let Julie take over that question.
Well, before we move to Julie on that question, I wanted to ask you, can you kind of tell us a little bit about, I couldn't really hear the recording very well, and I don't know if it was just me, but can you just kind of summarize the statement that John made?
Absolutely. Sorry about that. John just mentioned that he rides the bus, he's a senior, and the majority of the people he sees and rides the bus with, I believe he's about 80 years old. They're all on a fixed income. And so as you can imagine, a lot of people riding the bus are on fixed incomes. We've mentioned that a lot of the ridership, 80% are under 50,000. Lots of them are just making 10,000 a year. So hearing his concept and his experience completely can change how someone deals with everyday life, especially when it comes to paying bills and managing money. A lot of that money could possibly go back into the economy because most folks who are living on these fixed incomes really don't have the means to possibly set that aside. They're paying bills that they need to pay.
So, Julie, when you add, thank you, Faith. I appreciate you sharing that. And I also appreciate you having my same name. I'm not sure if I appreciate that yet because I don't like sharing my name. but Julie, as you talk about, as you help us dig into the economics, also talk about some of the barriers to the economics as well. So I want to collapse two of the questions. So what are the ways we're going to pay for this, or what possibilities are out there to pay for this? And then what are the challenges that we have to meet in order to do so?
Yeah, so it's going to be pretty easy to start off going zero fares, and that's thanks to the state and the federal governments and the programs they've put in place to provide relief dollars through COVID, and also for some of the state application that we'll be applying for potentially to continue zero fares, to do a pilot to see what impacts it has on the system. So starting out zero fare, maintaining zero fare in COVID's going to be pretty easy. Maintaining zero fare a couple of years after that with a pilot might be easy if we can get our local partners, such as Richmond, to sign a letter of support. The question is, the barrier is going to be, how do we maintain it once the federal and state money is gone? Is it a possibility that we lobby the federal government for larger subsidies to agencies to be able to maintain a zero fare and use the dollars that way? Currently, we can't use the federal dollars in that way. Do we look to the business community that as we have Amazons and other communities, businesses come to the region, do we ask them to support transit instead of supporting through passes to their employees, provide a subsidy or a subscription for the service that comes directly to their door? Do we look to the nonprofit community? Do we look to Dominion Energy and Bon Secours and some of the other partners who are essential to how our region is growing to also contribute to that, since they are already benefiting from that? Do we look for advertising revenue to be able to build the gap? And when we get to the end of a pilot, is there enough money available from these various sources to minimize the impact on our local government's resources? Because the local government resources are pulled in so many different directions that we need to try and make that more sustainable. The good news is that when we look at Kansas City, when we look at other areas that have done zero fare and the business case for it, the economic return to their GDPs usually is much greater than the cost to go zero fare on systems that are similar to ours, comparable in size or smaller. So there is a return to the local economy by going zero fare that can also help to sustain it long term. So there's some barriers, there's some opportunities, but it has to be something that we do together.
So just throwing this question out to either Nelson or Wyatt or Faith, whoever wants to answer. How do you think the current federal administration and with Pete Buttigieg as our transportation I forget his
Secretary.
Secretary, that's it. Secretary of Transportation, how do you think we regions and local transit authorities can maybe lobby the Federal Transportation Agency for additional funding for these kinds of programs and pilots?
Yeah. So we have to think about how much more money we've poured into highways over the last 70 years than we put into public transit. Just since the 80s alone, they made a deal that was supposed to be a good deal for transit, to give public transportation 20% of all federal dollars and 80% going to highways. And that was the good compromise deal. So you can imagine how imbalanced the funding was before that. So some of the things that can happen at the federal level to support the work that we're looking at here in Richmond to build a more equitable public transit system. One, we can overturn that 80-20 breakdown in funding. There are a bunch of national organizations like Transportation for America that are pushing for 50-50 funding, arguing that the climate crisis and our current inequities in America are really arguing for us to invest in public transit at least equal to what we've been pouring into roadways, which tend to divide and destroy communities, put people much further away from growth and jobs, and really make cars the price of entry into our society. One of the other things that can change at the federal level is to allow operating dollars to come from the federal government, not just using federal money on capital expenditure. It creates the awkward situation where GRTC can buy new buses, but they can't pay those drivers to drive the buses, which is just absurd. We really need to be paying for the transit that we want. I think also on the question of funding, you have to look, the state is getting very innovative under Governor Northam and Secretary Valentine. We had the Transit Rider Incentive Program created in 2020, which is designed to kind of set up zero fare pilot programs. Thanks to the lobbying of some of our wonderful delegates and senators like Delegate Dolores McQuinn, we managed to get $10 million in this most recent budget specifically for zero fare pilot programs. That can really subsidize localities as they experiment with this and set up multi-year pilot programs, which, as we've seen now, we have 6 pretty different and pretty big localities across Virginia that are interested in going zero fare for at least the next 3 years. That's Lynchburg, Roanoke, Alexandria, Richmond, Charlottesville, and Fairfax County are all now looking into zero fare. So there's the potential for us to increase the money going to that transit rider incentive program and have the state be a partner that helps pick up some of that tab for us. I think at the end of the day, we have a lot of different funding options on the table, but we really need local leadership to step up and say, this is what we want to do. We are willing to back this with local money if we need to. We know that 90% of GRTC's ridership right now is specifically from the city of Richmond. So having our friends on council and in the mayor's office step up and really kind of use the bully pulpit to say, we want to go towards this direction, could really be huge in as a signal for our state and federal partners that we're serious about this, we're doing our homework, and we're worth investing in to really try this out. And I think if we take that approach, we can hopefully get as much money as possible from the federal government and our state government, because we know that here in Richmond, we're not made of money, and we have a lot of needs. So it's really important to think about the holistic budget, but I think the argument for zero fare is one of putting money directly back into our most needy riders, and it's worth having the conversation.
So I want to add, we're getting really close to our time, and we can go over a little bit, but I know some of you have to go on to other activities and events and follow a tighter schedule. But I do want to ask this question because we are a organization that organizes around for the purposes of mitigating climate change and environmental justice. And we spent a lot of time talking about the justice, right, and the equity aspect of this, but how anyone who would like to respond, how can zero fares, two questions really put together, and this is the final question, how can zero fares help us mitigate climate change, address the environmental injustices, as well as how can those who are listening today or watching today participate and help amplify this message, and also to ensure that we actually are able to implement this pilot program, at least in Richmond, in this particular region. So if you have any thoughts on that, and I would love to hear from everyone on that.
If I can give, I'll give a 2-second one that most people don't realize, that when we're driving our buses, there's a significant amount of time that is spent at a stop as people board. When we don't collect fares, that time that we're sitting there idling at that stop can be reduced by 30 to 60%. That's significant. I'll just stop there.
And that is important because it's less emissions, right? Okay, so other thoughts?
Yeah, and I'll just add in, I mean, that also goes to being able to, increase reliability and frequency on the buses as well when they're not having, the fare collection is not having to happen. But I'll just echo a lot of things that we've been touching on so far on the environmental and climate change mitigation side of things. At the end of the day, that's about getting folks using the bus more, particularly if they're driving right now. And we talked about the ways in which zero fare can take away one of those barriers. But at the end of the day, on the environmental side of things, it goes to what Wyatt was saying about the need to increase funding for public transportation from whatever sources we can draw from. But when we think about the biggest vision for transit in the Metro Richmond area, that operating cost in 2021 dollars is about $135 to $160 million, which is roughly 100 million that we have right now, and that would not put us out in the outer galactica. That would just be putting us in a good, robust place in the nation in terms of funding for public transit. So increasing that every year after year, is really the name of the game to addressing climate change issues through public transportation. Just increasing the frequency and the reach of transit. And zero fare is a piece of that puzzle, but at the end of the day, it's about funding.
Faith, did you want to weigh in on that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say one way that people can take action now is sharing your story, share your experience, allow people to understand what it's like and how it's benefiting you. And please reach out to me at the 804-286-0007. This will allow me to share your experience and stories and advocate and spread your voice louder, especially when it comes to speaking with people who have the power to make that decision. These will be shared with them. So thank you so much for that.
Other ideas about, I do want to say, I'm going to put in a shameless plug for Virginia IPL. We are getting ready to kick off our campaign to focus on equity in public transportation. And I'm just so excited about the work that Faith Walker is doing. And we'll probably try to connect with you and collaborate with some of that work, because one of our first steps is to have a listening session about what is needed and how can it impact the daily lives of the people who are currently riding, and for what would it take to encourage more ridership. And we're almost at we're really at the bottom of our show, but I want to give a last round for anything anyone else would like to say and add to this conversation before we sign off.
I'll just add on to that final question that, we know that getting cars off the road lowers emissions, boosts our air quality. When we get people onto transit buses, that's just even better because you get the maximum number of people in one vehicle. So in terms of transportation emissions, it's great. I think one of the things that we don't pay attention to the power of transit is how it enables completely different lifestyles. Mm-hmm. a recent study showed that the number one thing that localities can do to combat climate change is to allow infill development. So if you think about the level of emissions that a lifestyle of someone who lives in Jackson Ward or in Manchester has compared to someone who lives way out in Midlothian or in Short Pump, you generally have smaller homes, which means less heating and cooling. You have lifestyles where you're not driving 45 minutes to get everywhere you need to go, but you're kind of walking around your neighborhood, you're biking, you're catching the bus. So the way you get around changes. For people to really kind of make that shift to a multimodal lifestyle, not giving up their cars completely, but starting to use other modes intermixed. It requires reliable and frequent public transit.
Yes.
You're never going to take the bus to work if you're worried that that last bus comes at 6 p.m., that there might be an hour that you'll go without another bus coming. So building out not only a system that is zero fare, which is great to get new people to try out the bus. We don't think about paying being a barrier, but it can be intimidating for people who aren't used to riding the bus, which a lot of people in our region are not. So it's not only great that we have zero fare to help lure people onto the bus to try out transit in their lifestyles, but it's really important that we're investing into good, frequent, fast, and reliable transit. So it's a service that people actually find useful and they're willing to build their lives around the bus.
I often tell the story that before I came to Richmond 20 more years ago, I lived in Chicago and I've lived in Atlanta. I've lived in big cities most of my life, my adult life anyway. And I lived in Chicago and I only drove my car on Sundays. I could take a train, L train. I could take a bus, an express bus. I could take a commuter bus that would go, stop at many more stops. And I did that for everything, for cultural events, for work, for shopping, for grocery shopping, even. And so I think that when we start really expanding our understanding of how important public transportation could be for creating really, well-rounded lifestyle and the ability for people to just move around the city. I think this is something I would love to see in Richmond. It's something I have salivated for the whole time that I've been here. And in thinking about this, and we don't have time for this, but we definitely have to have another show with you guests, the very same guest, a part 2. So we can dig in a little deeper because this is just we just were able to touch on a few things today. Thank you all. And if there's any last closing statement to send us off, please feel free to make that, and then we will end our show. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Faith. Thank you, Nelson. Thank you, Wyatt. You're a wonderful guest, really filled with a great deal of information and passion. And that makes for that's going to make for a good quality of life for the residents who live in and around Richmond. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having us on.
And I would just say, if public transportation is something you care about, let your city council member know, let the mayor know, let your local state officials, let your senators know. Just tell them that it's important and that funding really does change lives and can help us to overcome the climate crisis, because it's messages that they need to hear.
Well, we will probably come back to this, to give people more detailed ways for them to do this as well. So thank you so very much again for sharing this time with me today and this very important conversation.
Thank you.
Bye now.